Okay, John Howard will be launching his book, I think, on Wednesday at the National Press Club. Part of that, he talks about how he encouraged Malcolm Turnbull to reverse his decision to leave politics. Malcolm Turnbull said, yes, that's true, but he wasn't alone. Here's Malcolm Turnbull.
I thank John for all the advice he's given me over the years, but many people, when I said I was going to retire from Parliament, many people, thousands of people in fact, encouraged me to stay, and obviously John was one of them, and a very influential one he was too.
Thousands of people. He's under enormous pressure. But in retrospect, it just seems ridiculous that he ever quit in the first place.
Well, didn't Howard say the next day that Turnbull realised he'd made a mistake by announcing his resignation? And I mean, he might not have been thousands, but it was definitely a lot of people urged him to stay.
No, that's right.
And it ran throughout the party for various reasons. From people who just wanted him to hold the seat. They thought they'd lose Wentworth in a tight election. Range from that to, we need you in the party. We need people like you in the party. And it was quite overwhelming and widespread. And that's not... I don't think it's just Turnbull saying that.
And what about John Howard's rationale? Well, he's touched on this before, but spelled it out in some detail, that he had made up his mind that he was going to give the leadership to Peter Costello, and then Peter Costello got a little aggressive. He came in a little hard, and therefore he changed his mind.
Well, Glenn, you were instrumental in this.
Right, okay,
and in fact, it was your fault because you wrote that story.
Wrong. I mean, look, I like John, and, memoirs are self-serving by definition. But I wrote the story. It had nothing to do with Peter Costello. It had everything to do with Ian McLaughlin, the former Defence Minister, who thought that he was honouring a deal in 1994 to which he witnessed, in which Howard said he'd turn over the leadership in 1.5 terms. That's it. I mean, I
but
did
even
not...
if Peter Costello had motivated that, had encouraged that story, it still seems a bit thin in terms of using that as an excuse
I tell you,
denying
Barry,
the leadership.
I tell you, Barry, it was all Ian McLaughlin. It was the straight-backed soldier in him. He thought that there was a deal, and he thought that it had to be honoured, and it had nothing to do with Peter Costello. And John's suggestion in the memoirs that it did is just completely inaccurate.
I think Howard's sort of making the point, it wasn't so much the generation of the story, it was Costello's handling of it. The Costello should have just dismissed it and said that was 10 years ago, who cares?
Well, can I tell you, Phil, he did actually at the time. I mean, I know that he didn't think it was particularly relevant. He thought it was so far in the past that it wouldn't matter, and of course the reality was completely different.
I also think the fact we're still talking about this 4 or 5 years later shows that this bloke here should have won a Walkley for writing it. But it was probably the most defining story of that whole relationship between those two. But it's a message to judges.
Dennis, what do you make of the latest explanation?
Well, I think that John Howard did change his mind. I mean, a few people wrote at the time, around about May, June. Your story was in July, wasn't it? In May, June, a few people wrote. Piers Ackerman wrote a column which he reprints almost in its entirety this morning. And I wrote a piece saying that there was a change going on around John Howard. I was picking up very strong messages through June that something was afoot, that John Howard was looking at Christmas as a time to announce his retirement. So, there was something happening. That story happened. John Howard changed his mind. Those things we know about.
OK, well, one former leader, Kevin Rudd, had a rather pleasant moment in the Parliament this week when he raised the matter of Mary MacKillop. Here he is.
This was a celebration of an extraordinary Australian woman's life, and whatever people's religious beliefs might be, a cause for celebration for the Australian nation.
I was going to move that the Foreign Minister have an extension of time because he answered the question so beautifully.
Here.
And effectively.
Finally, the words he's been waiting to hear. Now, we'll try and answer the million-dollar question. How many politicians did it take to change a light globe?
A fluorescent bulb in my office blew the other day.
Oh, no.
My office rang Parliamentary Services and said,
look,
we need some light globes, to which they were told, no, we will send an electrician.
There are occupational health and safety considerations that come into play with things like changing light bulbs, light globes. It usually involves standing on a ladder.
It's a terrible waste of taxpayers' money.
I think it's a terrible waste of our time. Can we get on with it?
And they did get on with it. And then they focused on a far more compelling issue, the scandal over the veggie patch and the chicken coop at the lodge that Julia Gillard inherited from the Rudds.
Did somebody ask Ms Gillard whether she was going to maintain the veggie patch and the chooks?
Not that I'm aware of, Sally.
Perhaps are we going to see Mr Matheson doing a spot of gardening?
I've had no discussions with either the Prime Minister or Mr Matheson that would deal with that, Senator.
So the chooks have been evicted and the veggie patch has been left to die and wither. Is that the case? Or perhaps you might like to take that on notice.
Most interesting. This is the most interesting thing you've ever raised at estimates.
Well, I have to say, in defence of Tim Matheson, I mean, he appeared at a press club event this week in defence of cancer. He shaved off one of our colleagues' beards, Peter Vaness, who suffered from cancer. Good on him.
I don't think he was in defence of cancer, by the way. I think he was raising... trying to raise some money for a charity.
And he has fixed the pump on the swimming pool at the lodge and the barbecue, which had not been used since George Bush visited when John Howard was Prime Minister, I'm reliably told.
Extraordinary.